Chapter 5, we talk more about molecules and their structure and function, but we're going to go a little bit bigger. We're going to talk about macromolecules. So, two of the main things that you want to take away from this chapter is what are the building blocks and what do they build? So, the building blocks are going to be called monomers. What they build are going to be multiples of those monomers, which will be polymers. And there are four classes of biological molecules that do something similar to this, not always the same: carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Probably those terms sound pretty familiar to you, at least carbohydrates and proteins. Lipids, in layman's terms, we tend to call fats, although it's more correctly called lipids. And all four of these can be reduced to their simplest form, and generally, and the idea is that their simplest form is strung together, multiples of the same thing, and based on the arrangement of those multiples, you have a wide range of things that exist in our real world, in our natural world. So, as I said, within cells, organic molecules are joined together to form larger. Basically, you have it written there. I said it in the intro. So we have more capacity for variety because the few molecules that we have, the few types of elements that we have, can join together in a variety of ways, and we call these macromolecules. Covalently bonded, some of them in the thousands of those monomers bonded together, particularly if you are talking about proteins, and sometimes with the polysaccharides, thousands. But proteins tend to be really, really big molecules. And their structure, so how they're bonded together, dictates their function, or vice versa. Their function is dictated by their structure. It's pretty hard to separate those two. And there you have that word. Polymer is a long molecule consisting of similar building blocks. Those building blocks are monomers, so polymer and monomer. Polymers disassemble into monomers, and monomers can get together and form polymers. The disassembling to monomers is in a process called hydrolysis. And what happens there is those monomers are joined in a covalent bond by taking water out. That's where that hydrolysis comes in. It's a reaction. That's reversible. So if you're going to join two monomers by taking water out, you can then break them apart by putting water in. Four classes are, as I said, carbohydrates. Four classes with regard to polymers, as I said, lipids not so much, are carbohydrates, proteins, and nucleic acids. So four classes that do this stringing of single functional units together, or single building blocks together. Here's a chart, and these would be things that you would want to have in your head, information. So the polymer is a carbohydrate, or sometimes we call it a polysaccharide. I will, so I try to apologize. They're the same thing, I just try to use the same term that your book uses. So a carbohydrate is the polymer. The monomer of a carbohydrate is a monosaccharide. That's why it makes sense to me to say polysaccharide, but carbohydrate is the term that you're probably most familiar with. Protein is the polymer, and you have many proteins functioning in your body. The monomer is amino acid. The polymer is a nucleic acid, and this is the building blocks of DNA and RNA, DNA, that genetic material that you have. And the monomer is a nucleotide. And then lipids, fats, not exactly a macromolecule, but it does kind of fall in the middle there, and its monomer is a fatty acid. The reactions that build them up and break them down. So dehydration build macromolecules by removing water. Hydrolysis breaks down macromolecules by adding water. I just realized I said it backward on the first one. When you dehydrate something, you can think you take water out. It makes sense. And I really apologize on the last one. So you dehydrate, you remove water, and that's actually going to break the bond and put the monomers together into macromolecules. And hydrolysis, you break down by adding a water molecule, by inserting a water molecule. But we can see the image here on the next one. This one will help us make sure we are saying this properly. Dehydration reaction is otherwise known as a condensation reaction. Two monomers, and we have that in the top. So the dehydration reaction is listed in A. So you have a OH on the end, and then 3 short polymers, and then an H on the other end. You're going to link that with another single monomer by getting the H. You can see the H and the OH together. So the hydrogen atom and the hydroxy group, the OH, are going to link together to form water. That's the dehydration. That's the taking out of water, and it's going to link those monomers of this particular unit. So instead of having 3, now you have 4. That's dehydration reaction to create a polymer, synthesize. Then if we want to make that polymer a monomer, we're going to do hydrolysis. And with that, what we're going to do is take a 4-chain polymer. We are going to introduce water. That water is going to break the bond, and the hydrogen ion is going to go to one side and the hydroxy on the other. So then you have 2 separate molecules, and you have a monomer then. So 2 types of reactions, and the place this takes place is in the body in digestion. You take food in and you break it down. So you take food in, break it down into the smallest and smallest units. Those small units, whether they be monomers of carbohydrates or proteins, go into your bloodstream, taken to the cells, and then the cells put them together to make more of you. So you take food, make more of you. Take food, make more of you. That goes on all the time in your digestive system. It's part of your metabolic behavior. Carbohydrates are a good source of fuel and building material. For fuel for you as humans. You don't build too much of yourself out of carbohydrates. You're mostly built of proteins and fats. But certainly plants use carbohydrates as building material. And what you have are carbohydrates can be monomers of sugars and polymers of sugar. The simplest carbohydrates are named monosaccharides, or simple sugars. And you've probably heard this, it's a discussion about simple sugars, and they're leading toward obesity, etc. Macromolecules of carbohydrates are polysaccharides. So they are building blocks of the monosaccharides. So polysaccharides are broken down into monosaccharides, actually in the body with enzymes, and monosaccharides are built up into polysaccharides. They have the molecular formula, usually multiples of CH2O, such as glucose, where you have C6H12O6. So all they've done is multiply CH2O times 6. You just take each of those, you multiply each by 6. And glucose is the most common monosaccharide. It's the most common one that we talk about. It's the one that we use as our source of fuel. It's not our only source of fuel, but it tends to be our chosen source of fuel in what's known as our Krebs cycle to go in inside the cell. You have that 6-carbon sugar is broken apart into 2 3-carbon sugars, and then that 3-carbon sugar goes into the Krebs cycle and creates most of your ATP. That ATP, which is your energy currency that we talked about last chapter. The classification of monosaccharides are by specifically the location of what's known as the carbonyl group, and also the number of carbons in the skeleton. And that's what this image is. If you look over to the right, you have a 3-carbon sugar at the top, and you're looking at the C, the double bond of C to oxygen. And then in the middle you have a 5-carbon sugar, and then again looking at so each on the left and the right in the image, each are a 3-carbon or 5-carbon sugar or 6-carbon sugar, but where that carbonyl group makes it a completely different. For example, in the middle, that 5-carbon sugar, ribose, is the R in RNA, where ribulose is not that R in RNA. So that actually makes a huge difference with regard to how those two function. And then you may have heard of fructose and glucose. So those are both 6-carbon sugars. Fructose is the one that we find in fruits. Glucose, of course, is found in multiple things. Galactose, milk sugars. So you have each of those is a 6-carbon sugar, but they all 3 come from different major sources in terms of carbon. There are other ways to distinguish one monosaccharide form from another. We often draw them in the linear fashion, but many of the sugars that we talk about, particularly the 6-carbon sugars and the 5-carbon sugars, form rings. And sorry, the side of that got cut off. I'll try to fix that in the future. The 6-carbon ring that is glucose, which is C6H12 O6. Did I leave something out? I don't believe so. Is glucose, and that is our major fuel for cells in the body. One other way that we talk about sugars, particularly in carbohydrates, I guess carbohydrates and saccharides, we can have disaccharides, so we can have 2 of them together. And when we make that bond, we call that a special bond because we have created it. So disaccharides form when a dehydration reaction, remember we're going to take water out and join 2 monosaccharides together. We call that linkage that we made a glycosidic linkage. So it's a linkage between the 2 functional units, or the 2 functional areas, or the two reactive areas of the carbon ring of that monosaccharide, or that mono unit. Now, based on where that active site is, we are going to number those carbohydrates and number that linkage. And then we will talk about the difference between the 2 types of sugars based on where that reactive linkage is. So you have in maltose, you have the linkage between the 1 and 4 carbon. So it gives it its own unique property. We're going to pick this one up on the next teaching